Hello and welcome to the Santa Monica Flyers pre-flight video for the Sport Cruiser airplane. The pre-flight is done in 3 sections, which is the interior cockpit inspection and then the exterior inspection, and then we're going to get back into the airplane. So we're going to do it in those 3 phases. As you approach the airplane, the airplane is going to be tied down at 3 points. The first thing we're going to do is take those off. Obviously we're in the hangar, so it's not secured to the ground, but in the ramp outside it will be secured. We're going to take this tie down off. The tail tie down off. And the third tie down, and just leave them where they're secured to the ground right there. First thing to review is how we're going to open the airplane and get up to the cockpit in order to do this. The first thing is to bring this down like that. The canopy then lifts on the 2 hydraulic jacks and just push it away. The only thing to be aware of, and we'll talk about this again, in a high wind situation, the canopy is going to act somewhat like a sail, so it might be difficult in high winds, but right now inside the hangar we're okay. Right foot here, and like that is the easiest way to access the cockpit. And the first thing we're going to do, because we can, in the initial aspects of the pre-flight, is to consult the checklist. The checklist, as you can see, starts off with the tie downs removed, and then the cockpit check. So we'll go through these with the checklist. First, AROW, Airworthiness Registration, Ops Manual, Weight and Balance. In the back of the airplane, this aircraft is 1111 X-ray. We have the airworthiness certificate and the registration certificate, both for this airplane. In the back is the ops manual, operations manual for the pilot operating handbook for the Sport Cruiser airplane. And you'll find in section 4 is the W of AROW, weight and balance information. And you see it's specific, it's stamped. This is the weight and balance information for this specific aircraft, serial number 176, which is the aircraft we're pre-flighting today. Next item is controls free. The controls are secured in this airplane using the seat belt, so you can see the seat belts have secured it so that it doesn't blow in the wind when it's outside. If we just undo that, then the controls are free to move around for the pre-flight. Next item, key out. This is the ignition here. The key is currently not in the ignition. Master switch on, that's the black switch to the far left. Master switch comes on, you see that the electrics come alive. Flaps fully extended. Mind your legs as you lean forward and bring the flaps all the way to the extended position. Listen to the sound for the motor so it doesn't sound as if it's grinding or crunching. So we'll listen to the motor as we bring it down. Okay, that's the flaps in the extended position when the motor cuts out. Fuel gauges. In order to check the fuel gauges in this airplane, we're going to bring the instruments on, and you'll see that on the far right, the Dynon EMS unit comes alive. And if you look to the bottom middle, it says 7 and 6 gallons to the left and right. Next item on the checklist is if night check lights. We're not doing a night flight, so we'll disregard that check. And master switch off. Well, instruments off, and then the master switch off. We're then ready to do the exterior pre-flight inspection. I'm going to grab the fuel tester, which normally sits between the 2 pilots. And at this stage, I'm going to take the checklist and just put it on the pilot's seat, because I'm going to do the pre-flight using both hands. So I've got both hands free to manipulate whatever I want. So I'm going to put the fuel tester in my back pocket. Main principle of the pre-flight inspection is to start and finish in the same place and just don't neglect any part of the airplane. So having just got out of the airplane on the left side at the trailing edge of the wing, we'll start right there. Firstly, the flaps. Make sure that the flaps are going to resist the airflow as you're flying, and if you lift it, the flaps do not retract into the airplane. They're attached at 3 points and they're driven down here. The flap drive is right here. There is the flap drive. We have a hinge at this point here, make sure that that's secure. and there's another hinge right here. Make sure that the slot of the flap is clear. Secondly, the ailerons. There's at least 4 aspects to the ailerons. The first is to take it in your hand and make sure that it moves freely up and down. Secondly, you can look at the aileron itself and make sure that as well you can see there's nothing in the hinge that's going to give you any problems. There's a hinge area right here, and there's a hinge area right here. Thirdly, make sure that when you lift a control surface, the stick comes towards you. That's true of all 3 control surfaces. So as I lift the aileron, the stick comes towards me. You have a look at the cockpit. As I push the aileron down, the stick goes away from me. So if I lift the aileron, the stick comes towards me. If I push the aileron down, the stick goes away from me. Finally, as you look through the window of the airplane, make sure that as you lift one aileron, the other aileron comes down. And as I bring the aileron down, the other aileron comes up. So there's at least 4 aspects to checking the ailerons. As you come around here, make sure there's no substantial damage to anything around the wingtips. There's some cosmetic damage, but there's no substantial damage. The light assembly, make sure that that's secure in your hands. Look along the top and along the bottom of the wing and make sure that any damage is not visible to you. If you think of it this way, if someone was to drop something here and damage it, as you look straight at it, you might not see it. But if you look along it, then you'll see the reflection of any damage or any bending in the metal a lot more easily. From here, and again, you'll notice we're just checking every bit of the airplane as we go along. We're not neglecting any part of the airplane. The fuel vent right here, so that as you draw fuel out of the tank, it's not replaced by a vacuum, but the fuel is vented to the outside. Here is the pitot static, in other words, the pitot tube and the static port. So make sure that as you take it in your thumb and forefinger, gently rock it left and right, make sure it's secure. The pitot tube should be clear, and around the edges, the little holes that you can see is the static port. So make sure that those are cleared as well, otherwise your altimeter is not going to work properly. Coming along the front, the leading edge, make sure that no one's driven it into a pole or anything like that. There's no damage to the leading edge. And we'll come to the fuel tank. Fuel tank, as you can see, is a 15-gallon capacity tank. And as you have a look inside, we're going to do a visual check of the quantity, having previously checked the fuel gauges. If I shake it a little bit, you should be able to see some fluid moving in there. What we found with this airplane is that even if there's only a small amount of fuel visible in the tank, that means that there's at least 5 gallons in there, and as you can see, there's a little more than that. And this airplane is going to burn approximately 4, maybe 5 gallons an hour. That's conservatively speaking. Coming around to the front, as we get down here, we'll get down to the gear. The tire, the inflation of the tire is good. The tread of the tire is good. And as we come to the side, we're going to make sure that there is no evidence of any brake fluid leaking, especially off this caliper at the bottom. While we're here, we'll go ahead and we'll take the chocks, and we'll put the chocks where the tie down line goes right here. The brakes are not on, so we won't remove the nose chock until we're actually ready to taxi. We'll leave that one in. As we get to this part here, we'll go ahead and take the fuel tester. And we're going to drain a sample of fuel which is from the low part of the tank. Any water or any grit or grime will be in that part of the tank. Just get any drips out so that it doesn't drip on the ramp. And if you have a look at the fuel sample, hold it against something white, you'll see that there is no separated water. It is clear, and it's a straw color indicating that it's not water. Question often arises, what would it look like if there was water in it? So let's just briefly have a look at what it would look like if there was a little bit of water in the fuel. And it would look like 2 separated layers. And that's how you would know. Okay? Now that that's a contaminated sample, obviously I'm not going to put it back in the tank. Contaminated sample of fuel is going to go to the far side of the ramp, which is where we're going to deposit it. Having disposed of the fuel sample with the water contaminant in it, I'm just going to put this at the side so that it dries without me getting fuel on my pants or anything like that. We'll come back to that, make sure we leave it there. Obviously we don't want to depart with that like that. So from this position here, we've checked the condition of the landing gear, we've checked the fuel line, and we've checked that there's nothing leaking from the bottom. Leading edge, the fairing, intake right here. This is just a cabin intake. In theory, if you had left the airplane for 2 weeks, it's possible you could have a bird's nest in there or something like that. These airplanes fly really rather too regularly for something like that to happen. While we're here, we'll check the hinge here. Looks like it's in good shape. And while we're looking at that, the general condition of the canopy doesn't look like it's cracked or grazed or any problems like that. Coming forward, we'll have a look at the bolts holding the canopy in place, the cam locks right here, make sure that they're all holding it in place. Down the bottom, 1, 2 there. These are just oil drip lines, there's not much to see there. The exhaust doesn't look excessively corroded and pitted. And from here, we'll check the inflation and the tread of this tire, as well as the condition of the gear leg. So there's no evidence of cracks or damage to the gear leg. There's a cotter pin here, a cotter pin here, and a cotter pin on the other side of the gear. Those are safety pins holding those bolts in place. We're going to leave the chocks there so that as we walk around there's no danger of the wind picking up and moving the airplane. Let's come back up. We'll come past this intake right here. And again, just to re-emphasize, the principle is just not to neglect any part of the airplane as we do this. Next thing that we'll do is we'll check the oil. We'll do that in a couple of stages. First thing we'll do is we'll take this, we'll take it off, and we're going to set it on its tail so that none of this oil gets on the airplane like that. From here we're going to leave the sequence slightly in as much as we're going to come to the propeller, and the reason we're going to do that is that we need to rotate the propeller until we hear a noise which indicates that the oil is now where it needs to be for us to check it. Before we rotate the propeller, just while we're here, let's just have a look at the leading edge of the propeller, make sure that the blades are good. Make sure that we haven't picked up a stone. If we picked up a stone on the propeller, and remember, if you're going to rotate it, always rotate it in the direction that it normally goes, which from the front is counterclockwise. If we picked up a stone, then there might be a crack or a cut, and then the stress as it turns is going to concentrate itself at that point. So that's the most important thing that you want to make sure. And check for the third blade right there. So from here, if we want to come around to the side, we're going to rotate the propeller in a counterclockwise manner until we hear a noise. And the noise we're looking for is like described as a toilet flushing or something like that. Okay. It's a pretty obvious noise unless there's a jet going past, so if there is a jet going past you might want to pause until the noise is gone. As you take this out, make sure that you don't wave it around, and as you can see there is a flat part and the oil should be somewhere on these crosses between there and there. And like I say, don't pull it out and then wave it around so that it drips off the line at the bottom as you can see it's doing now. Put it back in the little hole which is right in the center. Just drop it in. Take this and without getting oil all over it, just put it straight back on, click it into place, and then make sure you put that back like that. And that concludes the check of the oil. Getting back into sequence, we'll come around to the front here. We've already checked the propeller blades. Landing light's in good condition, it's not damaged or anything like that. There are two radiators, one for the coolant, one for the oil. Make sure that that's clear, and that that's clear right there. We previously checked the propeller blades. We'll also check now the spinner. The spinner is not structural, the spinner is aerodynamic, so you can't push or lean or anything like that on this. Just check around the hub, especially to make sure that there's no cracks right there, around here, and around the third blade. And on each side there should be 3 screws to hold it in place, so make sure 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here, and 1, 2, 3 at the bottom. We've previously checked the intakes here and here, coming around the side. Going to make sure that the cam locks are all in place on the right side of the airplane. As we come down to the bottom, one there, one there. Again, the oil drip lines, not much to see. At this stage, we're going to take the fuel tester back from where we left it to dry off. And this is where we're going to drain some fuel from the gascolator, which is the point at which the fuel enters the front area from the cabin of the airplane, which is where the fuel selector is. And this is the low point of the engine fuel system. And again, as before, we're checking to see that there's no water, there's no grit, there's no grime, we have a good fuel sample. And because it's a good fuel sample, and only because it's a good fuel sample, we're going to put it back. Obviously, if there was anything that made us suspicious about it, we wouldn't put it back. I'm going to leave that open because the next thing that we're going to do is actually check the fuel here. From here, checking the rivets, the skin all the way around. And like I say, we've arrived at the point where we're going to check the right fuel tank, so let's draw a sample out of there. Just make sure you wait until it stops dripping. Same again, make sure that there's no separated water layer. Make sure it's a slightly straw color so it's not a tube full of water. There's no grit, there's no grime, there's nothing floating in it. And because it's a good fuel sample, we'll put it back. And once we'll just leave it there, let it dry before we put it back in the airplane. While we're here, actually, if you come back, since we've got it open, let's check the quantity again. You can just see the fuel sloshing around in there, which means we've got at least 5 gallons, which is roughly what was indicated on the interior pre-flight when we turned the gauges on. Coming back to where we were, we've got the gear, we've got the inflation and the tread of the tire again. Once more, make sure that there's no fluid leaking from the caliper. Any brake fluid would assemble at this point right here and drip onto the ground from these lines, which are the hydraulic lines. So make sure that you don't see any evidence of that. General condition of the skin and rivets at the bottom. Leading edge, the right wing is effectively the mirror of the left wing, except that we don't have pitot-static on this side. Leading edge, make sure that no one's driven it into anything. The light assembly, secure. Looking along the top and along the bottom surfaces to make sure there's no indication of any damage. The fuel vent, the right tank is vented, as is the left. Coming around the side, there's no substantial damage to the wingtip. The check on the aileron is the same as the one on the left wing, except that on this side we have an electrically actuated trim tab. Again, just make sure up, down, check in there, make sure that there's no evidence of anyone having dropped anything in there. Check along the edge, make sure it's not obstructed, and check here. One thing that we might have mentioned on the other side is actually you can check the actuator. We'll try and remember to do that as we come back. The ball joint there should look secure. As you can see, the electrically driven trim on the aileron is right there. Right flap is exactly the same as the left. Make sure that it's resisting the airflow. Check down at the bottom that the hinge is secure right here. The hinge is secure here. And the drive, which is right here, is also secure. As you come around to the back, we can also check the tread on the rear of the tire, having previously checked it on the front. And now you can get a good look at the brake assembly, make sure that the brake assembly looks secure, and make sure, again, that you cannot see any fluid leaking off the bottom. While we're down here, there's an antenna that we can check right there. This little ball hanging down is the transponder antenna. So just give that a shake between your thumb and forefinger, however you can reach it, make sure that it's not going to come off. Check the general condition of the skin and rivets at the bottom until you get back here, which is where the communication antenna is on this airplane. So that's to communicate with the tower. Coming up to the top, checking the general condition of the skin, the rivets, and also the window to make sure that there's no cracks in there. Around the fuselage, again, the skin, the rivets, there's no evidence of any of the rivets popping out. This is the third of the antennas. There's actually 4 on this airplane. This is the third one. This is the ELT, the emergency locator transmitter. That'll transmit on 121.5 in the event of a high impact landing. Make sure that that's secure. And we get back to what's known as the empennage. There's 4 main aspects to the empennage. You've got the vertical stabilizer, you've got the horizontal stabilizer, you've got the elevator, and you've got the rudder. Coming back in sequence, these 2 aspects are certainly structural aspects of the airplane, so if you take them like that, there shouldn't be, as you move the airplane, any evidence of them moving. The leading edge, especially of the vertical stabilizer and horizontal stabilizer, come around to the side, you can neutralize the elevator like that. And again, you can look along the top and look along the bottom the same way as you did along the wing to make sure that there's no obvious any damage to be seen. And we said, remember, as you raise the control surface, it comes towards you. That's true with the right aileron again. If you look at the stick as I raise the right aileron, raise it, it comes towards you, lower it, it goes away from you. That's true for the third control surface as well. So as we take the elevator, if you raise it, the stick comes towards you. So I'm going to raise the elevator, and you see the stick comes towards. If I lower the elevator, the stick goes away. Raise a control surface and the stick will come towards you. Checking right here, we'll check that the bolts and the attachment point look like they're good. Here we've got the electric trim for the elevator. That's the electric trim actuator right there. And if you look in there, you can see that the bolt assembly looks secure for the elevator itself. There's a third light for night flying right there. Make sure that that's secure. As far as the rudder is concerned, when there's only one of you doing the pre-flight, the most important thing is to take it in your hand and just bring it to the left and to the right and make sure that there is some resistance, it's not flopping in your hand, which might indicate that there's a problem. Since there's effectively two of us right now, what I'm going to do is have you go up and have a look at the pedals of the airplane where your feet go. And if you look at the pedals as I bring it to the left and right, you'll see that as I bring it to the left pedal goes in, and as I bring it to the right pedal goes in. So when there's two of you, or when you're performing the pre-flight with an instructor, then one of you can do one and one of you can do the other. Up at the top here on this airplane, this is the only one of the three sport cruisers that has this. We have a VOR antenna. You can check that that's secure to the left and right. Coming along the edge, the trailing edge, you see there's minor cosmetic damage to the elevator here, but that's not going to cause any major problems. In here we have the second attach point. It's moving freely in your hand as you move it, and then along the top and along the bottom. To the left side of the horizontal stabilizer, make sure that there's no evidence of anyone having driven that into anything. General condition of skin and rivets. Leading edge we've already looked at. And then along the left side of the fuselage, all the way back, effectively to where we started. Make sure that you have a look, as we did as we passed the other side, especially at the skin and the rivets. It's easy to forget the skin and rivets on the lower side of the airplane. The one thing that we forgot, you'll notice we're now back where we started, when we started going around, is the rear side of the tire and the brake assembly on the left side. And again, there's no evidence of any fluid leaking off this caliper or any puddles like that. Having done all of that, having completed the pre-flight, we're now going to return to the checklist and make sure that we got everything. So we left it on the seat. And together we'll just go through these items as they're written here. So we're going to start with the left wing. The flap down and secure, we check that. Aileron free and correct, we check that. Wingtip undamaged. Light fixture, the light fixture is secure. The tie down we removed, it's the first thing we did. The fuel vent is clear. The pitot and the pitot-static tube is good. The wing leading edge is undamaged, there's no damage there. The fuel in tank is sufficient for flight. Well, there's about 12 gallons that we'll say on board, and so that's sufficient for a flight of about an hour, maybe about an hour and 15 minutes. Fuel quality, we drained it on the left side. Left gear, the tire inflation, there's no bald spots on either the front or the back. Wheel chocks, yes, we removed the main wheel chocks, but we've left the nose in until we're ready to taxi. Brakes, no fluid leaks. Cowling at the front of the airplane, the cowling is secure. The oil cap we removed so that we could check it. The prop blades, we checked the propeller blades were in good condition before we moved them. Propeller turned counterclockwise to burp, which is the noise that it made before we checked it. The oil level is on the flat between the cross hatches. Oil cap was replaced and the access door was closed. It's worth checking that at least 3 times because it's going to ruin your day if you go flying with that out. So make sure that the access door is closed. Air intakes are not blocked. Around the nose gear, the tire inflation, yes. The cotter pins, which is the safety pins holding the bolts in place, checked, yes. Gear leg in good condition, we did that. Chocks removed. Now that's a deferred item. The chock is still currently in place around the nose gear because we're not ready to taxi yet. Gascolator, well, that's the point in the engine fuel system where we jet drain the fuel. On the right side, the tire inflation was good and there's no bald spots. The wheel chocks, yes, they are removed. There weren't any as it happens when we started. Brakes, there were no fluid leaks. On the right wing, the fuel quality we checked by draining it. Fuel in tank is sufficient for flight, yes it is. Leading edge, no damage. Fuel vent was clear. Tie down was removed early on. Light fixture secure. Wingtip, no damage. Aileron free and correct movement. Flap down, resisting the air and secure at 3 points, 2 drive points, 2 hinges and the drive point. The antennas, communication antenna, which is at the bottom, we checked. Transponder antenna, which is the low point, which is the little one that hangs down at the bottom, that was attached. The ELT on the top of the fuselage was secure. Empennage, just a fancy name for the tail. The vertical stabilizer secure. Horizontal stabilizer was secure. We had a shake of those. Elevator free movement, we raised it and the stick came towards us. Rudder free movement, and it's also correct movement. The tie down we removed early on. Skin, we checked the rivets. General aircraft ready to taxi, that's an important one. General aircraft ready to taxi is your final triple check that you've done everything. You want to come to the front of the airplane and say to yourself, okay, this airplane is now ready to move forward. Now there's a couple of things that means that that's not true. The first is that we've still got the chocks in. Make sure as you take the chocks out that there's no danger of the airplane moving, because right now the brakes are off and the chocks are out, which means that there's nothing stopping this airplane from moving. Now it's a light airplane, which means it's not difficult to stop, but you wouldn't want to leave the vicinity of the airplane once you'd removed the chocks. Okay, secondly, I've got a bottle of water sitting here, which I was using to show you about the fuel. I don't want to taxi with that in place, so let's make sure we get rid of that. We can put it in the airplane. And finally, have I left anything sitting on the airplane? Yes, I have. I left the fuel strainer sitting here. So let's make sure that that's not there. We'll put that back between the pilots before we get moving. Finally, the chocks are out, yes. The tie downs are off, all three, yes. The fuel caps are back on, the oil cap's back on, and I haven't left a briefcase or a cup of coffee or anything sitting anywhere on the airplane. Right now the airplane's ready to move forward, and that concludes general aircraft. That includes the exterior pre-flight inspection. Finally, we'll run through the interior pre-flight inspection, and then after that is the engine start. And so having finished the external pre-flight inspection, you can take the checklist. Having checked those items off, we'll just put this to one side, and let's review how to get into the airplane. There's several things that you don't want to stand on. As you can see here, there's lots of no step here. This is not a good place to step. This is not a good place to step either. What you want to do is take your right foot here. You can grab it here, you can grab it there. Put your left foot where the black lines are, and you'll see that there's a handle here between the seats, and there's a handle up here. What you don't want to do is either sit on or lean on this part of the seat right here. So from here, bring your right foot, you watch the right foot also so that it doesn't drag over the flap right there, and just get from here to here, and sit down in the left seat. Take the seatbelt from both sides. It was previously adjusted to secure the control, so it'll probably need readjusting. Secure there. You want to secure the lap bar first, so that's relatively tight. Secure it left and right so that it's centered. The shoulder doesn't have to be crazy tight. You should be able to move and see around the airplane, but it should secure you somewhat. Finally, if there's a little lever down the bottom which you would simply have to find, it's not really possible to see with the camera, that you can unlock, and you can see my feet move to readjust the pedals wherever you want them and locked in place. Okay, from having got in and having adjusted the seatbelt and the pedals the way that we want, we're going to go through the interior pre-flight inspection checks. First items are the passenger briefing. You want to make sure that your passengers know how to attach and how to get rid of the seatbelt. As the captain, you're obligated to provide a safety briefing, the same as on any airplane or any airline that you've ever been on. Exit procedure, you want to make sure that your passengers know that in flight, the canopy is going to be locked down by this handle in position between the two pilots, and that before they get out of the airplane, they're going to have to unlock the canopy by bringing that back up. Comm use, make sure passengers know that right here is the push to talk, so that if they do take control of the airplane, they want to be down here and not up here grabbing the push to talk button. Motion sickness, there's usually a bag in the airplane, so make sure that there is one, and make sure that your passengers know that if they do feel unwell, the most important thing is to tell you so you can get the airplane on the ground. Look for traffic. In other words, tell your passengers if they see something not to assume that you've seen it and to call traffic out to you so that you can avoid it. And point out, as far as the LSA waiver is concerned, that this is a light sport airplane and not a standard category airworthiness airplane, which is and you're obligated to point that out to a passenger. Having briefed your passenger, we're then going to start to move towards getting the airplane going. First item is the master switch on. The master switch is this black switch here. We're going to flick it up, and you'll see the electrics start to come alive. Next item is the instruments on. That's the next switch to the right. You bring that on, and you'll see that the EMS, which is the screen to the right, also comes alive. Strobe lights on, that's the next green switch. The next switch is the fuel pump, you don't want that yet. The green switch is the strobe, so we'll bring that on. That's the anti-collision lights are then on. Hubs and tack time, you can cross-check those against the dispatch board and make sure you're not paying for someone else's flight time. If you look to the bottom right side of this airplane, the tack time is there as 2206.3, the Hobbs 3092.4, make sure that's the same as what's written down. The trim should be neutral. The trim is controlled by these four buttons here. That's nose down, that's nose up, that's left and right. And these indications, the green lights, should be in the vicinity of these two white marks, both for the aileron trim and for the elevator trim. And you can see that they're in the middle here and in the middle here. The circuit breakers are these right here. Make sure that they're all in. If any of them are out, they need to be reset. Carburetor heat. Here's the carburetor heat. That's the carburetor heat on, and that's the carburetor heat off, which is where you want it right now. Fuel selector on the fullest tank. As we did the pre-flight, both of the tanks were showing roughly the same, and sure enough, as you look over here to where the fuel quantity is indicated on the EMS, they're both saying 7. Right now the fuel selector is on the right tank. If you wanted to move it to the left, just move the arrow through the top, like that. Pedals and belts, make sure that your belts are secure, make sure that whoever's sitting in the right seat, that their belts are also secure, and make sure that the pedals, which we previously moved using this handle right here, are locked in place with a click. Lights as required. We have brought the strobe lights on, and assuming that we're doing a daytime flight, that's the only light that's required right now. Insert key and do not turn. We'll take the key, which usually sits here between the two pilots, insert it, and do not turn. Finally, brakes on. Here is the parking brake at this point here. Pull it towards you. And if you look at my feet, I'm going to pump the brakes a couple of times to make sure that the pressure is up. So now when we turn the key, the airplane's not going to move. Next item is the engine start, and so that concludes the pre-flight inspection.